Hello! Welcome to ShoddyCast's Creator Commentary Series. I'm Charles Battersby. I'm the screenwriter for ShoddyCast's Fallout lore for just about every episode in the first 3 seasons, and for several episodes at the end of Season 4. I also co-wrote ShoddyCast's Fallout Brotherhood, and I wrote the upcoming feature film, Fallout Unity. I'm recording this almost 4 years after we first started work on this project, and the very first thing that strikes me about this is that we had an absurdly long opening credit sequence back in Season 1. These credits just go on and on. It's like a minute and a half before the actual video gets started. So in later seasons, if you're just now watching the show, then in later seasons you'll be delighted to find out that we cut down the credits a lot. So stick with it, I swear. So while we're waiting for the opening credits to play through, I'll tell you a little bit about how this project got started. ShoddyCast had been doing an Elder Scrolls lore series, and around the time this started, they were about a dozen episodes into that. I had written a play that's not officially set in the Fallout universe, but it was a lot like the Fallout games. It's called That Cute Radioactive Couple, and it was a romantic comedy about a married couple that were trapped in a bomb shelter built for one. It had the same kind of darkly comedic sense of humor that the Fallout games have, and when I sent it to ShoddyCast as my writing sample, and ShoddyCast liked it well enough, and they asked me to write a Fallout-specific script. And so I wrote an episode on Three Dog that was never produced, but it did become the basis of our Three Dog episode, which we did later at the end of Season 2. When I started work on this episode that you're watching here, the Elder Scrolls series was coming up to the end of its first season, and I remember thinking as I wrote this, hey, if we can get a dozen episodes out of this, I'll be delighted! And now it's almost 4 years later, we've got like 70 episodes, plus a spin-off series, a feature film, a short film, a set of radio dramas, so I'm very pleased with how it all turned out. Now that we're getting into the episode, a few things that really stick out as I look back on this is how the writing was much different back then. The scripts that we do for the later seasons and for Fallout Unity and Fallout Brotherhood, that's all written in standard Hollywood screenplay format where we talk about the camera angles and the action that's happening on screen. Back when I did this first season, everything was just written in straight paragraph form as a monologue for the voice actor to read. I didn't put in any description of what's being seen on screen. And something that I found out very quickly is that I didn't really need to do that. That everybody at ShoddyCast, they're just giant Fallout nerds like I am, so I could put in incredibly obscure references and the director or the machinima artist would come up with something that's not just appropriate, but they would also figure out little secret obscure references that I made to the Fallout universe. And there's also a lot of physical comedy that happens where I would write something describing it very vaguely, and then the animators or the director would put in a lot of physical comedy on top of that, which it's always a surprise for me to tune in and see, what they do with my scripts, and I'm always pleasantly surprised with it. Something else that stands out to me looking at this first episode was I was just a huge, pretentious fancy pants with the way I wrote the dialogue. What was that line there? Their pride was seared away by atomic fire. And you'll also notice that Jason, the voice actor, he does a slightly different voice in the first couple of episodes. We didn't really nail down the idea of the storyteller as a character in the world until a few episodes into this. When I did the very first script, it was just a generic narrator. The mindset that I had when I wrote this episode is that maybe this is like a Ken Burns documentary, maybe in the 24th century, long after the events of the Fallout games. Maybe the Brotherhood or the NCR has something like PBS, and they've got, the Ken Burns of the 24th century producing these historical documentaries, and that's what this video is. And eventually I made the decision that our character should be a person that's in this world, and that the events of this series are occurring at the same time as the events of Fallout New Vegas. So as you're watching this, for Seasons 1 and 2, the idea is that as Storyteller and later Edna are walking around the world, the actual events of Fallout New Vegas are happening, and the Courier has risen from the grave but not yet had the second Battle of Hoover Dam. The idea that the narrator doesn't actually know how the events of Fallout New Vegas turn out was important in how I described a lot of it. It takes about 6 weeks for one of these scripts to go from me handing it in to it actually appearing online, so the first few scripts I didn't know what the voice actor was going to sound like. I didn't know if we were going to have a gravelly voiced Ron Perlman voice actor, or if it would be something wildly different. So it's only about the third or fourth script that I'd actually heard Jason's voice and knew what he was doing. And over the next few episodes, we slowly got in a rhythm where I was writing just for what he's going to do to the scripts, and had his voice in my head as I'm writing them. Somewhere around writing episode 5 was a point where I picked a specific character from the Fallout games, and I said, that's the character that's doing this narration. ShoddyCast has this unofficial policy where we don't want to directly state who the storyteller is, and over the course of 4 seasons, we had a bunch of different ideas. I was writing all of season 1 and 2 and most of 3 with the specific idea of this one character, and ShoddyCast had also come up with the idea of an outlandish plot twist that would be added in later on, and there was also a long-standing policy of never directly stating who the character is. But as I was writing season 1, I had a very clear image in my mind of who the storyteller is inside the armor, and it was written from his specific perspective. And in fact, the original final episode of season 1 was all about the storyteller and who he was and how his adventures had led him to where he is now. And we ended up not doing that. The final resolution of season 1, that you'll come to later on, that had a slightly different ending. The first time that I had hinted about the storyteller's identity was in episode 11, where we talk about Ulysses and the Divide. And so if you watch that episode again, about halfway through, there's a really direct reference to the storyteller. And that was my first effort at playing this long game where we would eventually pull the camera out and see the narrator. And around the time that I was writing the final episode of season 1, that's when Josh at ShoddyCast had approached me and said, oh, wait, what if we pull back and reveal the narrator and he's doing stuff? So we had both had this vague idea of doing something like that, and when it came time to do the big season finale, we were very much in sync in what we wanted to do. So of course, one of the things I really regret about putting the series together is that we didn't sit down and really think about who the narrator is before we started writing that first episode. And we also didn't think, who is this character telling the story to? And of course, we know that Fallout fans are watching it, but within the context of the story itself, who is the narrator telling the story to? And that's something that we didn't get into until season 2, and then we really got heavily into that in season 3 and 4. So if I ever do an entirely new lore series on an entirely different franchise like BioShock or Mass Effect, then I'll definitely factor that in when creating the show from the ground up. We've learned a lot over the 4 years that we've been doing this. One of the things that I'm just terribly proud about for Season 1 is that I did have this rule in mind that the narrator can't know anything that wouldn't be available through some kind of documentation or witness. So even in this first episode, there's still references to the narrator doesn't know how certain things turned out and can only speculate on them because there's no witnesses or there's no documentation. That's something that stuck with the series the whole way through, that the narrator can only know things if he's directly spoken to a witness or if the player somehow left behind proof that this happened, or a holotape or a computer file. When we did the episode on the Sierra Madre, one of the things that was conspicuously missing from the episode was that there's no talk about the ghost people and the history of the ghost people, and I deliberately left that out because there really wasn't any way that the narrator could know that this stuff had happened. Only the player has actually gone through those levels, and then the player abandons the Sierra Madre, and how could the storyteller possibly know this? And later I broke that rule when we did the Storyteller audio log, so if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can actually hear the Storyteller talking about some of the things that we didn't cover in the Machinima series. Another little regret that I have is that as Season 1 went on, we started covering more and more trivial groups. It was our goal at first to cover the main factions, the really big groups or classes like the mutants and the ghouls, and then get down to talking about important missions or important people and important storylines. And as Season 1 went on, we ended up covering less and less interesting stuff. Later in the season, I started to feel like we were running out of steam, that I'd been covering things that might seem interesting at first glance, but there's not a whole lot of in-game lore or official canon about them, and characters that you come across them in the game and you're like, wow, what's this guy's story? And it turns out that there isn't much story behind that character. They came up with a cool mission or a cool design for the enemy and a few lines of good dialogue, but beyond that, it's only fan speculation on what a certain character or group's backstory might be. And that's when I started slipping into the attitude of wanting to have more adventures for the storyteller outside of the lore and writing non-canonical material. So very often in the lore series, I would end up taking things that were hinted at or implied, and then having the narrator directly state that these are fact. And that's me taking this pseudo-canon and putting our own little ShoddyCast stamp of approval on it. Another thing that we did in the first season that we no longer do is we were very concerned about giving away spoilers during the first season. And so in this episode, there's a lot of vague references where the storyteller will say, well, at least one person did this, or some people did that, or maybe this thing happened. And in the more recent seasons, especially Season 3, we just charge straight ahead, and it's, if you haven't heard the 20-year-old spoiler about what happened to the Vault Dweller when he went to the hub, then, you know, that's on you now. And here we are at the end of the episode. I hope you enjoyed this first in our series of creator commentaries. We'll be doing more of these on select episodes that the creators find particularly interesting, and if there's an episode that you would like to hear a creator commentary for, call us out on social media or in the comments section below.